First of all, Francis Gurry, Director General of the World Intellectual Property Organization, thank you for agreeing to join us for this interview, the first in the IPA YouTube channel.
It's a pleasure, Jens. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Now, on behalf of IPA, I would like to congratulate you for your re-election as Director General.
Thank you very much. We have had, as you know, excellent cooperation, and I look forward to intensifying that over the coming years.
Of course, you are not only you have not only been at WIPO for your last term as Director General, you have spent most of your career, nearly 30 years, here at WIPO. So my first question to you would be, looking back at those 30 years, how has it changed? How has WIPO, how has WIPO changed?
Over those 30 years, and it's a little less rather than a little more than 30, but it's a lot. Over those 30 years, first of all, WIPO is globalized. You know, it was not so many member states, now 187. Back in the 80s, it was the commencement of the international expansion of the organization, if you like, in terms of membership. The world is globalized extraordinarily. Technology has moved at an accelerated rhythm, and especially for copyright, the internet has been born in that stage. So I would say everything has changed in the course of those 30 years. And that has created a much different situation for intellectual property and for WIPO. So we see intellectual property has moved, if you like, from the periphery to the center of the system. It's a vehicle of globalization as well as a beneficiary of globalization, I would say. And the economic value associated with intellectual property means that it's at the center of political debate or debates of political economy more and more. It's harder to get agreements. We see that. I think if you looked at the record internationally in the 70s, then you had in the 60s and 70s quite a lot of international treaties being agreed. Now, as you know, it's a rare event, although we've had two in the last 2 years in the field of copyright. So massive change right across the board in every sense, politically, institutionally, economically, culturally, and that creates a very challenging environment for intellectual property.
Now, the second question, of course, has to be looking forward. How do you see all those changes that have accelerated over the past few years? How will they influence the agenda of WIPO as you move forward and as you have moved from the periphery to center stage? What will be the issues, if you can make a prediction, for the next 6 years?
Well, look, more generally in the field of intellectual property, I think one of the things that we have to deal with, and this concerns copyright less, is that because the value of knowledge-based capital is more important, and because intellectual property captures the competitive advantage that arises from knowledge-based capital, more and more people would like to have intellectual property capturing their competitive advantage, and so we see enormous demand, and so one of our roles is the management of that demand of intellectual property worldwide, just the mechanics of the system. But turning more to the copyright area, I think we have had, as I mentioned, the recent successes in the normative area. We have a normative agenda to pursue, and most notably there, we have the question of broadcasting that is arising, and we have the question of limitations and exceptions, which is on the agenda to manage, I would say, because there are very different perceptions in the membership about the agenda on exceptions and limitations. Our task is to try to come, of course, to an outcome, whatever that may be. Sometimes it's a treaty, sometimes it might be soft law, sometimes it might be something else. An outcome which is generally accepted by consensus as the appropriate outcome. That's the normative agenda, but not everything's normative, of course, and there's lots of other things going on in the copyright field, as you know better than I. And I would say we are very interested in 3 other areas. One area is promoting a dialogue about the global digital marketplace. In short, I think that we all recognize that we are evolving towards a global digital content marketplace. In certain senses, we already have one, only it's an illegal one. And it's a little bit more difficult to get content legally than it is to get it illegally on the internet. And that difference, I think, creates an incentive for piracy. So one of the ways, and it's not the only way, but one of the ways I think in which we can contribute to more respect for intellectual property and copyright on the internet and for creative works is to encourage a functional, efficient, global digital marketplace. And I'd like to see a dialogue in which you, Jens, are participating personally and for the IPA develop to a greater extent there. Then we're interested in the collective management area, which we think is rather important, particularly in the developing countries. And there we would like to continue to promote an initiative which is just getting underway, which we call the tag of excellence, transparency, accountability and governance, and good standards that people can sign on to and eventually be awarded the tag of excellence for the excellence of their transparency, accountability and governance in the field of collective management. Then I think we are interested more generally in the question of data management. Data management, it's related to both the first and the second things that I've mentioned. Of course, it underlies them. You have done extraordinary work, I think, in the private sector. We are not, as a public organisation, trying to replace any private initiative. I think our role is to try, if we can, to add some coherence to the many initiatives that are occurring around the world in this area.
And of course, as a global organisation, you can bring in geographically a lot of people that are much more difficult to reach for the stakeholders who are economically more concentrated.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly one of the contributions, one of the added values that we can contribute. Obviously, lots of things are happening outside the public sector. But one of the value additions, as you say, is that we can try to make these happen with different actors around the world and try to use our position of legitimacy that we aspire to bring in, to make it a truly global conversation.
Now, you mentioned, Francis, that the Church of WIPO has become broader. You have more members. You have also more voices of criticism. And some of these people are saying that copyright is an obstacle to development. It is an obstacle to access to knowledge. My question to you is simply, are they right?
Well, in short, no, I would say. But here's the thing. In order to have access to something, you have to have the something. So copyright plays an indispensable, in my view, indispensable role in ensuring that we have that something that you can have access to. So it is the principal market mechanism for the production of, for incentivising the production of cultural content. And that's a very important position, I think. And there are not many alternatives. States taking over, state subsidies, patronage, basically copyright's there and that's its value. Now, of course, I think the nature of the copyright system as designed from the outset has been one of trying to achieve a balance between all the various interests that surround creativity, and that includes the individual interests of the creator, but it includes also the social interest of society, the general interests of society in having access to the creation. It's not much good to have creations if we can't enjoy them. So it's a question of balance, and I wouldn't see a one-sided approach of saying that copyright impedes access as being at all balanced or at all helpful. We have to find a way of maintaining the production of cultural content that so enriches our lives and is so indispensable now, I'd say, economically as well as culturally. And we have to do that in a way in which we also take advantage of some of the opportunities presented by the new medias to diffuse this cultural content at reasonable prices.
You have mentioned, Francis, the slowness of the normative process and the need to find alternative ways that WIPO can contribute to the changes in society. Can you give us a few examples of the activities of WIPO and the kind of projects that you see moving ahead to, for WIPO to contribute to the knowledge economy?
I think you put your finger on the drama of all international organisations. They're designed as a beast to be slow-moving. And for good reasons, because you have to get everyone on board. But they're slow-moving beast in an extremely fast-moving world, as you say, and one that's only going to move faster and faster. That's our dilemma. I think we have to measure the contribution of international organisations across decades rather than across months. And there I think you can notice some successes. And we have a considerable acquis, as they say in French and in the European Union, a considerable acquis of the international copyright system dating from the Berne Convention. That's extremely important. That's the basis on which we need to build to try to face challenges. And it is slow. It is slow, there's no doubt. But most of the action, in my view, is not in the normative area. Most of the action is in the construction of the global, seamless global digital marketplace. And that doesn't require, in my view, a normative instrument. Of course, there are one or two things that may need to be dealt with normatively, but the real action is in the enterprise sector and ensuring some coherence in their actions towards this marketplace.
Now, there is one area where WIPO is not trying to keep up with technology, but where actually WIPO is a trailblazer for new developments. And this is the area of expression of folklore, traditional knowledge, and genetic resources. From the publisher perspective, this is an area of worry because it looks like a new layer of rights is being developed, and that this new layer can perhaps impede on the publisher's copyright, on their freedom of expression, on their access to information, and on the way they can conduct their business. Are publishers right to be worried?
I think it's normal to be worried for all of the reasons that you suggest. I think that's quite normal. But I would, in addition to being worried, if I may say, be engaged. Because in order to get the right outcome that will ensure that your worst fears don't materialise, I think you have to be engaged in the discussion. We do know that traditional knowledge systems are extremely important and have made great contributions to humanity. As a matter of fact, 80% of the human population relies on traditional medical systems at the moment. And so these are very important. We have to find a way to satisfy what I think is a legitimate demand on the part of the developing countries to see some respect for their traditional knowledge systems. And only by the engagement of the publishers, but also the developed world, are we going to come to an outcome that will ensure that we have the right balances in the respect that is given for traditional knowledge systems. The only other thing I would add is that in general I see that now we're at a stage in this work where we have to go from rather a lot of generalizations to concrete. We have to go from protect all traditional knowledge to identifying the specific and concrete areas in which it is appropriate to extend protection.
Francis, can you give us a specific example of how WIPO and rights holders, and in particular publishers, are working together to improve access to knowledge?
Well, I think a great example is our joint project, which we are now calling the ABC, Accessible Books Consortium, coming out of the Stakeholders Platform. A wonderful project because, first of all, it brings us together, along with other rights holders and other interested parties, the World Blind Union, everyone. Secondly, this is a fantastic ideal that we have, which is to make books accessible to visually impaired persons in a practical way, and something that is going to deliver, immediately tangible outcomes.
As you mentioned before, this is a very trying and testing time for WIPO. Over the past few weeks, we've seen several committees that were not able to conclude, and it feels a little bit as if tension is building up, as if we are creating a kind of hiatus that can explode in one way or the other. Is this something that you've seen before, or is this something that is unusual? What do you expect in terms of developments over the next few months?
No, that's right. I do think, to answer your direct question, yes, I've seen it before. I think this does tend to go in cycles. At the moment, I think generally we're suffering from a very, very, very much reduced capacity on the part of the international community to agree. I tried to say this to one of our committees last week, at the beginning of the week, without much success, as it turns out, given the outcome of the committee. But what I said to them is that your disagreements about the list of speakers for an international conference, and they're about terms of reference for an evaluation study to be done. And if the capacity of the international community to agree is so reduced that it can't agree on a list of speakers for a conference, how are we going to solve the massive challenges confronting the international community? So I think we really have to make this effort to improve the capacity to agree of the international community. And the best way to do it, in my view, is to take specific issues where we can have a sound empirical basis to the discussion, and there we're going to rely on the engagement of the IPA, all the publishers, the rest of the creative community, to educate us. Let's take the education limitation. I think we need to be educated by the publishers as to what is happening in this transition from printed textbooks to platforms and electronic media for the distribution of educational content, and how that is occurring economically as well as technologically. So yes, there are a lot of tensions around. I think they characterise the whole of the multilateral scene, not just WIPO. Let's try and be pragmatic about it and find particular niches where there is an opportunity for us to go forward.
And finally, to conclude, you mentioned that WIPO's primary role is to ensure that the creative industries can continue to be be sustainable and part of the business world. You have explained how WIPO is contributing to to global digital marketplaces, to collective licensing, and to other collaborative projects. My final question really would be, how can publishers and WIPO work together to ensure that this shared aspiration comes true?
Well, please continue to participate. I think this is the first, and fundamental message. Your participation is precious, and we really are grateful to you for the interest and engagement in the organisation. Please continue doing that. Secondly, I think systemically we have a much larger question in the multilateral system again, of trying to have more multi-stakeholder involvement. So it's really important that we do not, while we don't forsake our intergovernmental character, we find ways to have the non-state actors, if I may say, express themselves, because they are so important in today's world. If you look at the world today, this is how things are moving, and this is where things are moving in the world. It's amongst the non-state actors, the enterprise sectors, civil society, the NGOs, the whole range in society. We have to find ways of interacting with that in better. It's not easy. There are resistances to it. Some prefer to underline the intergovernmental character. But we are, as a Secretariat at any rate, really open to this, and open to trying to help some member states understand why it is important for the relevance of the organisation that we are able to have these multi-stakeholder dialogues.
Francis Gurry, Director General of WIPO, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to give us this interview, and would like to ask you one final question. As a reader, what was the last book that you read that really touched you?
Well, the last book, I can go with most of that sentence. I'm not sure about the important issue that touched me, was a book called Brooklyn by Colm Tóibín, who's an Irish author, as you know. And I thought it was a charming novel, a really charming novel. I was totally charmed by it and the world that he created, which was an Irish immigrant in Brooklyn. And I thought it was a very human story.